With all the talk of Rumble being a viable jungle champion, I thought it'd be a good idea to touch on comfort versus ideal team comp. So, in both instances, usually as a series progresses, a team will go more towards comfort rather than the ideal team comp or the experimental team comp in the very beginning of a series, or say if like you're in the group stage of MSI or Worlds or something, you're going to be willing to try more risky things in the very beginning to see if you can maybe get a couple surprises out of your enemies before you actually show your real hand. And so I think there are great instances of players playing, comfort. Famously, Westdoor's Fizz, if you want to go way back, right? Or Sven's Ezreal, right? Or hell, even Faker's LeBlanc, which, something that SKT had relied on in their last game against EDG at MSI, to where then Pawn brought out the Morgana as a counter pick, but they kind of were drawing upon the fact that Faker would pull out, his I think it was undefeated at the time, I want to say, undefeated LeBlanc, to, expect that of him. And then they had this kind of ace in the hole, so to speak. So, these are things that you can kind of rely on when it comes to teams kind of playing in a characteristic of, do they want to play for more comfort or the ideal team composition? And so I like to make this akin to like a car without ABS, right? ABS stands for anti-lock braking system, right? It's the system that prevents your brakes or your tires from locking up if you stomp on the brakes really hard, because instead it forces your brake caliper, your pad, right, to rapidly hit against it, and it kind of makes this this like thudding pattern as you're coming to a stop, and it's to prevent your tires from locking up. Well, turns out sometimes that's actually not the best way to brake at all, and in fact, a expert driver can be better than ABS, especially considering if you're driving in the snow. Oftentimes you can brake better than an ABS system could ever brake. It's because the threshold at to which your brake pedal will go down hard enough to where you don't skid the tires. This is why famously a lot of rally drivers don't actually use ABS, because it hinders themselves when they're either on dirt or they are on snow or whatnot. And even back in the day, actually, drifters, these are for like cars in the 90s from the Japanese era. They would delete their ABS. They would take it off of their car because at the time it just wasn't fucking good anyways, because car manufacturer companies were still new to the technology itself, but also it would just instill a lot of driver lacking of confidence whenever they're taking around a corner and maybe you tap the brakes. It would accidentally trigger the ABS, or especially if you're going backwards, ABS doesn't actually work properly, so now your brake pedal is all different and shit, and you're used to ABS. So whole point being is that sometimes an expert can actually be better than the system that is trying to implement itself upon that person. So SKT previously in 2017, this is one of my favorite videos that Riot did, which was the teamfight breakdown videos that they used to do. And this was when in 2017, it was in the spring split against Samsung, to where SKT, this was with Huni was in the lineup, I think, and Peanut, and they played a CC-less comp. It was Rumble, Kha'Zix, Corki, Ezreal, and Karma. Right, so Karma's really the only actual hard CC that they have, and they ended up winning the entire the game. And this was just obviously due to them being really fucking good at the game, and not every team can actually pull that team composition off, obviously. And I think this is also why teams can't sometimes not play Rumble in the jungle. Maybe they're used to having some form of CC in the jungle, to where now when the jungler goes to gank a lane, they're already bringing CC to the party. Hecarim or Udyr, for instance, right? two great examples, or even Elise for other times as well too. So teams are now slowly starting to realize that team style doesn't have to adhere fully to the meta, but that same argument is always just presented with picks which largely influence style in League of Legends. The point no one ever seems to end up correlating to all of this is that if you're making a change to your team's playstyle to fit in some meta picks, that can distract your entire team from conquering their own weaknesses that they could otherwise shore up by practicing comps that they already do know or picks that they already do know. But instead, you're spending time playing these new meta picks that you don't end up perfecting the picks that you had before or the compositions that you had before. So it becomes this pace to where you can never kind of catch up and never perfect an actual composition. And this is what I like to call the double-edged sword. I actually did a video on this topic back in 2018. Yeah, 2018. Might even be 2017, to where I talk about how you can end up going into this pattern to where you're trying to find maybe these unique picks in order to get an edge or something, but then you have to incorporate these new picks into the entire team, right? It's just not enough that you practice it in solo queue. You also have to incorporate it into your actual team, your esports team, right? And in order to do that, you need to do scrims. And so you're dedicating some of this scrim time in order to focus on this unique wonky pick. I think I gave an example of Huhi's Aurelion Sol. I mean, Aurelion Sol plays so much different than any other mid laner that that all of his teams, whenever that he wanted to pull it out, whether that be 100 Thieves or whether that was CLG, they had to practice that pick. There's no way that you could just up and pick that, even though he is proficient with it, his team isn't proficient with it. So you have to make that decision when you're deciding, whether to practice these unique picks or not. And so in, the broad theorem, I guess, that, statistically, because of the patch notes, these champions are the best, right? But you have to balance that out with what your players are capable of just realistically, as coaching staff, as well as their natural ability to pick up champions on the fly anyways, right? So having them or requesting them to pick all these new champions that, have been buffed by the patch notes, I think it is the duty of a League of Legends player, a professional League of Legends player. That is their duty, in fact, is that they have to be on top of things that are at the peak of the meta in order to take full advantage of that champion. And you play the patch champion to a proficient level so that if it's unbanned, you can then pick it, right? That's part of the reason as to why you even practice these champions to begin with, is that so that it gives you a bigger advantage in the draft phase, or rather it just doesn't have a weakness within the draft phase to where, I don't know, maybe you have to ban the mega OP on blue side, right? When in fact, every other team, since they play it, they don't have to ban it on blue side, which forces the person on red side to ban it, right? So if you end up having to ban this mega OP pick that everyone else is banning on red side, it already shows your cards that you can't play the pick and that you aren't willing to let it go over into, the second pick phase to where now red side can get that pick, right? So additionally, the skill discrepancy between proficiency on a champion and a champion's base stats, it usually gets more weighted towards the stats themselves, right? Because the skill of a pro player, it's so close nowadays to other pro players, right? Especially with, less outplay potential that has been generated throughout League of Legends patch notes, or I guess the game just fundamentally changing as a whole. It's more of a 5v5 game rather than something to where you can kind of outplay your opponent by yourself somewhat to a degree. And this is, of course, excluding obviously the wildcard teams and players, because they just aren't up to the to the skill levels of, I would say at least the four major regions, in fact. So realistically, there is a type of balance that you need to have with comfort versus ideal team composition, but I actually think it weighs more towards the ideal team composition just because those champions are so powerful. It leaves a big fucking gap in your draft phase, in fact, and it kind of gives away all your cards if you can't play those champions. And you're just throwing away those free base stats of themselves anyways, right? It's just like if you were to play a champion and you don't pick what is meta as far as items are concerned because, it gives you like 20 extra AP or something, and there is no downside. Why would you not pick up that item? That's the same exact thing with studying the champions and whatnot. And sure, yeah, there's less of a learning curve as to just having more raw damage versus actually learning a champion's entire kit. But it's the point of that the base stats themselves are going to inherently give you an advantage anyways, right? So that should at least recoup some of the painstaking time that it takes in order to learn that champion. And additionally, just a whole nother side topic is that solo queue is meant to play these champions and get familiar at least with it from a micro sense and from a lane phase sense to then where you can actually incorporate it within your esports team and say, hey guys, I want to play this pick in scrims, and then you're able to play it, right? And then you could test that, see how it works as a team dynamic instead. And so some of these champions though are harder to play in solo queue versus in professional play because some of them have more of a team dynamic, which you can't really replicate in solo queue. So it becomes more time consuming, in fact, because now you have to get up to speed as a group of 5 rather than just the person playing in solo queue for the majority of it to learn 90% of the champion, and instead now you're stuck at a base of 75% and you have to do the extra 25 with your entire team. So overall, I think teams should trend towards the ideal team composition because there really shouldn't be a whole lot of reason as to why you can't pick up any of these very powerful champions as a pro player, because it is partially your job in order to know exactly what is strong. Your team, your management should let you know what's strong. Your analyst should let you know what numbers are strong, maybe what to build, and actually how to maybe jungle or maybe how to play out the lane phase or whatnot. This is all what your coaching staff is for. So it just kind of goes to show, I guess, that there is a little bit of lacking in terms of structure when it comes to some of these esports teams and not being able to play some of these high-powered picks.